The promise of forever was a simple thing, spoken in the quiet dark with his lips against her hair. It was a promise made of breath and shadow, easy to give when the world was only the two of them, contained within the cold stone walls of his chambers. For Lucian, whose forever was a literal, unending expanse of nights, the word had always been a weight. With Mira, it was an anchor. It was the first time he had not felt adrift in the lonely, blood-tinged sea of his own immortality. Her mortality was the flaw in the promise, the unspoken tragedy they both ignored, but the intent was pure. Forever was the shape of his love for her. He found her in the southern gardens, where the moon-petal blossoms unfurled their silver faces to the coming night. She was tending to a patch of night phlox, her human hands, so impossibly warm, coaxing life from the soil. The scent of damp earth and sweet flowers clung to her, a fragrance of life that was more intoxicating to him than any perfume. He stood in the archway of the covered colonnade, a creature of stone and shadow, watching her. The fading light of the twin suns painted the sky in bruises of violet and rose, and the glow caught in her auburn hair, setting it ablaze. In that moment, she was a small, bright flame in the vast twilight of his kingdom, and the thought of extinguishing even a fraction of her light was a physical agony. He had been with his council for 6 hours. 6 hours of listening to Lord Valerius, his oldest and most pragmatic advisor, lay out the facts with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. Troop movements on the eastern border, the Iron Clans uniting under a single, bloodthirsty banner. Alliances crumbling like sun-bleached bone. Their kingdom, for all its ancient power, was isolated, vulnerable. The Dragon's Tooth Pass is the only viable route for their armies, Valerius had said, his voice a dry rustle of parchment and dust. And Princess Seraphine of the Sunstone Dominion holds the key to it. Her father will not grant us passage, let alone aid, without a permanent bond. A marriage, my king. The word had landed in the silent council chamber like a thrown stone. Marriage. A political sacrament, a bartering of bloodlines and titles. It had nothing to do with love or promises spoken in the dark. It had to do with survival. Lucian had argued, his voice low and dangerous, a rumble of thunder trapped beneath the earth. He had spoken of other strategies, of force, of diplomacy. But every path led back to the same cold, unassailable truth. They needed the alliance, or they would face a war on a scale not seen in a millennium. A war they were not guaranteed to win. The princess is of age, Valerius had pressed, his gaze unwavering. She is said to be a great beauty, a suitable queen. Lucian had wanted to shatter the great oak table with a single blow. I have a queen, he'd wanted to roar, but the words died in his throat. Mira was not a queen. She was a human, a scholar from a conquered province, a woman he loved with a terrifying, consuming totality. In the eyes of his court, she was a diversion, a beloved, respected consort perhaps, but not a queen, not the key to their salvation. Now, watching her hum a soft tune as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration over a stubborn weed, the council chamber felt a world away. This was his world. Her warmth, the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart that was a constant song beneath the silence of his own. He could feel it from across the lawn, a drumbeat of life that called to every dead cell in his body. He finally moved, his steps silent on the flagstones. She didn't startle when he came to stand behind her. She had long grown accustomed to his soundless approach. She simply leaned back against his legs, her head resting on his thigh, and sighed. "Long meeting?" "The longest," he murmured, his hand coming down to rest on her hair. The silk of it was a shock of warmth against his cold skin. He tangled his fingers in the strands, a desperate, possessive gesture. This, he thought, this is real. The rest is just noise. "Valerius looks more grim than usual," she said, her eyes still on the flowers. "He has a way of sucking all the air out of a room." Lucian almost smiled. He would consider that a compliment. He knelt behind her, his knees sinking into the soft earth, uncaring of the dirt on his fine trousers. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest, and buried his face in the curve of her neck. He breathed her in, earth, flowers, and the unique, irreplaceable scent of Mira herself. He could stay here for a century. "Lucian?" Her voice was soft, questioning. She could feel the tension in him, the frantic energy coiling beneath the stillness of his embrace. "What is it?" He couldn't form the words. He was a king who had commanded armies, a creature who had bent the wills of mortals and immortals alike for centuries. But telling this one woman that he was about to betray their quiet, perfect world was the hardest thing he had ever done. So he framed it differently, not as a betrayal, but as a strategy, a necessity, a political maneuver that would mean nothing, a hollow ceremony that would change nothing between them. "There is a threat from the east," he began, his voice muffled against her skin. "A serious one." He told her about the Iron Clans, about the Dragon's Tooth Pass, about the Sunstone Dominion. He laid out the facts as Valerius had laid them out for him, a cold, logical progression toward an unavoidable conclusion. He felt her stiffen in his arms as he spoke the name, Princess Seraphine. He finished, and the silence that followed was vast and terrifying. The garden sounds, the chirp of a night cricket, the rustle of leaves in the rising breeze, seemed amplified, intrusive. He waited for the tears, for the anger, for the accusations. He was prepared for them, had steeled himself to soothe them, to reassure her. But Mira did not weep. She simply pulled away, just enough to turn and look at him. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable in the deepening twilight. Her eyes, the color of a twilight sky just before the stars appear, searched his. "A marriage," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement. A fact that had settled in the air between them, solid and cold. "A political arrangement," he corrected her, his voice urgent. He took her hands in his grip too tight. "A piece of paper, a ceremony. It means nothing, Mira. You are what matters. You are my life. This changes nothing between us. You will remain here, with me, always, as you are now." He believed it. In that moment, with the desperation clawing at his throat, he truly believed he could cleave his life in two. He could be the king, husband to a political bride for the public eye, and he could be Lucian, who belonged wholly and eternally to the woman before him. He saw it as a sacrifice he was making for his kingdom, and he was asking her to share the burden of that sacrifice. She looked down at their joined hands, his pale and large and inhumanly strong, hers smaller, warmer, smudged with dirt. She was quiet for a long time, so long that Lucian's unbeating heart felt like a stone in his chest. When she finally looked up, her expression was one of profound, heartbreaking sadness. But her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "I understand," she said. And he, in his arrogance and his desperation, mistook her stillness for acceptance. He heard her words, but missed their meaning entirely. He did not see that she was not accepting his terms. She was accepting a truth he was too blind to see. He pulled her close again, relief washing through him so powerfully it almost felt like victory. "Thank you," he whispered. "We will weather this. Together." She rested her head against his chest, but her hands, still held in his, remained limp. She did not cling to him. She did not return the embrace. She simply stood there, a still point in the ruin of his making, and let him hold her. She was already saying goodbye. He just wasn't listening. The preparations for the royal wedding began the next day. The castle, usually a place of quiet, echoing grandeur, was transformed into a hive of frantic activity. Tapestries were aired, floors were polished to a mirror sheen, and cartloads of flowers arrived, filling the cold stone halls with the cloying scent of lilies and roses. Lucian moved through it all like a ghost, his mind elsewhere. He spent his nights with Mira, holding her, talking to her, desperately trying to reinforce the fiction that nothing had changed, while the entire world around them screamed otherwise. She was compliant. She listened when he spoke of his day, of the endless negotiations with the Sunstone emissaries. She allowed him to hold her, to kiss her. But a subtle distance had crept in, an invisible barrier he couldn't seem to breach. It was in the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the way she would fall silent in the middle of a sentence, her gaze lost on some distant point beyond the castle walls. He told himself it was grief for the future they were supposed to have, a grief he shared. He thought it was a wound that would heal with time, once the ceremony was over and the political necessity was a thing of the past. He never considered that it might be the calm acceptance of an ending. Princess Seraphine arrived a week before the ceremony, a vision of pale gold and ice. She was tall and regal, with hair the color of spun moonlight and eyes as gray and cool as a winter sea. She was beautiful, exactly as promised. But it was a remote, untouchable beauty. She moved with the serene grace of someone who had been trained for this exact role her entire life, her emotions a carefully guarded fortress. During their stilted, formal meetings, her courtesy was impeccable, her conversation intelligent, but there was no warmth. They were two pieces on a political board, moving as they were directed. For this, Lucian was grateful. It made the lie easier to bear. He had asked Mira to design the floral arrangements for the wedding hall. It was a selfish, desperate act, a way to weave her into the ceremony, to feel her presence in a day that was a betrayal of her. He wanted her touch on everything. He imagined she would refuse, but she agreed without hesitation. She worked tirelessly, her hands gentle and sure, as she wove garlands of white roses and silver-leafed ivy. She created a masterpiece, a winter forest blooming in the heart of the great hall. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and it was heartbreaking. Each perfect blossom felt like an accusation. The night before the wedding, he found her in their bed, not sleeping, but staring up at the canopy. The moonlight streamed through the high-arched window, painting a silver stripe across the silken sheets. "You don't have to be there tomorrow," he said, his voice quiet in the stillness of the room. He sat on the edge of the bed, not touching her. "No one would expect you to." She turned her head on the pillow to look at him. Her face was a pale oval in the gloom. "I want to be," she said softly. "I should be." He didn't understand. He thought it was a display of strength, of defiance, a way of showing the court, and him, that she would not be hidden away. It filled him with a painful, misplaced pride. "What will you wear?" he asked, trying to imagine her in the crowd of formally attired nobility. "Something blue," she said, and a real smile, the first he had seen in weeks, touched her lips. It was a sad, fleeting thing. "A color for new beginnings." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. Her skin was cool. "I love you," he whispered against her temple. "Remember that. Tomorrow is just noise. You and I are the silence underneath it." "I will remember," she promised. And she would. She would remember it as the last time he ever spoke those words to her in their shared bed, in the quiet of their shared life. The wedding day dawned cold and clear. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue. The sun a distant, watery disk. Lucian stood before the high altar in the grand sept, clad in black and silver, the weight of his ceremonial robes a physical burden. The hall was filled to capacity with the nobility of 2 kingdoms. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and melting beeswax. He felt detached, an actor playing a role he hadn't rehearsed. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching. And then he saw her. She was standing near a pillar in the back, half hidden in shadow. She was wearing a gown of deep sapphire blue, the color of the evening sky just after the sun has vanished. The fabric shimmered in the candlelight, and it made her stand out from the muted tones and garish jewels of the court. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck. She was not crying. She was not scowling. She was watching him with a look of serene, absolute focus. And she was smiling. It was a small, gentle smile, but it was genuine. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever seen. The great doors opened. Princess Seraphine began her slow procession down the aisle. She was a vision in white and gold, an ice queen from a forgotten legend. Every eye in the hall turned to her. But Lucian's gaze remained fixed on the woman in blue. He saw Mira's smile widen slightly as the bride passed her. It was a look of approval, of peace. His mind reeled, unable to process the contradiction. How could she look so at peace at the funeral of their future? He went through the ceremony in a daze. He spoke the ancient vows, his voice a hollow echo in the vast space. He placed the ring, a cold band of sunstone gold, on Seraphine's delicate finger. Her hand was cool, unresponsive. When the high priest declared them bonded, a polite wave of applause rippled through the hall. He looked out again, to the pillar. She was gone. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, pierced through the fog of his detachment. He scanned the crowd again, his gaze frantic now. The space by the pillar was empty. He told himself she had just stepped away, gone to the reception ahead of the crowd. But the knot in his gut tightened. The reception was a grand, suffocating affair. Wine flowed, music played, and hundreds of lords and ladies laughed and plotted and gossiped. Lucian stood beside his new bride, accepting congratulations, his smile a mask of agony. His eyes never stopped moving, searching every face, every corner, every doorway. Seraphine stood beside him, a portrait of regal composure, occasionally murmuring a polite response. If she noticed her new husband's frantic distraction, she gave no sign. He endured it for an hour, the polite fiction becoming more unbearable with every passing minute. Finally, he could stand it no longer. He gave Seraphine a murmured excuse about greeting a distant delegate and broke away from the dais. He moved through the throng, his steps quickening until he was almost running. He went to her rooms first. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open, his breath catching in his throat. The rooms were silent, empty. But they were not just empty of her. They were tidy, impersonally so. The books she was reading were no longer on the bedside table. The shawl she always left draped over her favorite chair was gone. Her small collection of dried herbs and flowers had vanished from the windowsill. A single vase stood on her writing desk, holding one perfect white moon-petal blossom. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He tore through the castle, the library, the gardens, the astronomy tower, all their places. He was met with nothing but echoing silence and the scent of wilting flowers. He sent his royal guard out, first discreetly, then with open urgency. "Find her," he commanded, his voice raw. "Find Mira." By the time the twin suns rose on the first morning of his new marriage, the truth had settled in his soul like a shard of ice. She hadn't just left the reception. She hadn't just left the castle. She had vanished, and the single, perfect flower left on her desk was not a promise of return. It was a signature, a final, beautiful, deliberate period at the end of their story. The smile she had given him in the sept had not been one of strength. It had been one of farewell. The months that followed were a special kind of hell. On the surface, King Lucian was a model of stability. He honored his new alliance. He worked with Seraphine's father to fortify the Dragon's Tooth Pass, presenting a united front that made the Iron Clans reconsider their imminent invasion. He ruled his kingdom, sat in council, and performed the duties of a monarch with cold, grim efficiency. His queen, Seraphine, was a perfect partner in this public charade. She was intelligent, politically astute, and emotionally distant. Theirs was a marriage of quiet, respectful emptiness. Two sovereigns sharing a castle, but not a life. They rarely dined together, and they slept in separate wings of the royal palace. The arrangement suited them both. But beneath the veneer of the capable king, Lucian was a man obsessed. Every resource not dedicated to the defense of the realm was poured into the search for Mira. His best trackers, his most subtle spies, fanned out across the continent. He followed every rumor, every whisper of a red-haired woman with a scholar's hands and a quiet smile. He chased ghosts through bustling port cities and forgotten mountain villages. He found dozens of women with auburn hair, but none of them had her eyes, the color of a summer sky at dusk. None of them smelled of earth and parchment. Valerius cautioned him, his voice dry as ever. "Your Majesty, the alliance is fragile. Your preoccupation is noted. It is unbecoming." "Find her, Valerius," Lucian had snarled, his controls snapping for a brief, violent moment. "Or I will tear this kingdom apart, stone by stone, to do it myself." The local vampire had simply bowed, his expression unreadable, and left the king to his torment. Lucian's nights were the worst. He would walk the halls of his own castle, a prisoner of memory. He would stand in her empty rooms, where the scent of her was now just a phantom his desperate mind conjured. He would trace the curve of the chair where she used to read, his fingers meeting only cold silk. He had promised her forever, and he had lost her in a single, stupid, arrogant afternoon. He had thought he could have both his duty and his love, and in his greed, he had lost the only thing that made his endless existence bearable. The silence in his chambers was no longer peaceful. It was a scream. It was 7 months after the wedding. 7 months of cold beds and colder hope. A scout, one of his most tenacious, returned from the farthest southern coast of the continent, a place of fishing villages and salt-sprayed cliffs. He brought not a confirmation, but a possibility. A woman matching Mira's description, living alone in a small cottage in a village called Saltwind. She worked as a healer and an herbalist for the local fishermen. She called herself Alani. Hope, a feeling so painful he had almost forgotten it, flared in Lucian's chest. He didn't send a messenger. He didn't delegate. He went himself. He traveled for 3 days, pushing his mount to its limits, not stopping to rest or feed. He arrived in Saltwind as the suns were setting, casting a brilliant, coppery light over the sea. The village was small, nestled in a rocky cove. The air smelled of salt and fish and wet stone. It was a world away from the Gothic spires and shadowed valleys of his kingdom. This was a place of open skies and endless water, a place of harsh, vibrant life. He found the cottage easily. It was set back from the others, perched on a low cliff overlooking the water, with a small, chaotic garden bursting with herbs and wildflowers. Smoke curled from its chimney, a thin gray ribbon against the orange sky. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his heart, which had not beaten in 500 years, feeling as though it were about to shatter in his chest. This was it. The end of the search. He was terrified of what he would find. Would she be withered by grief? Consumed by anger? He had rehearsed 1,000 speeches, 1,000 apologies, 1,000 justifications. None of them felt adequate. He walked to the door and raised his hand to knock, but hesitated. Through the single front window, he could see her. She was standing at a wooden table, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. She wore a simple linen dress, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was looser now, a fiery cloud around her face, flecked with sea salt. She was humming that same soft, tuneless melody he remembered from the garden. And she looked content. There were no dark circles under her eyes. Her shoulders were not slumped with the weight of sorrow. There was a placid, peaceful focus in her movements. The sight of it was a blow more powerful than any physical weapon. He had imagined her pining, heartbroken, waiting. He had imagined his absence as a gaping wound in her life, just as her absence was in his. But looking at her now, he saw not a wound, but a neatly stitched scar. Or perhaps no wound at all. He finally knocked. The sound was too loud in the quiet evening. The humming stopped. He heard the soft scrape of the pestle being set down, then footsteps. The door opened. Mira stood before him. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, the only sign of surprise. There was no fear, no anger, no joy. Just a quiet, weary recognition. "Lucian," she said, her voice calm. It was the voice one uses to address a distant acquaintance. "Mira," he breathed, the name a prayer and an ache. All his prepared speeches vanished. "I've been looking for you." "I know," she said. She didn't invite him in. She simply stood in the doorway, a placid gatekeeper to a life that no longer included him. "I assumed you would." "Why?" The question was torn from him, raw and desperate. "Why did you leave? Without a word?" She finally looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the profound sadness he remembered from the garden. "I said everything I needed to say, Lucian. You just weren't listening." She gestured vaguely back towards the north, towards his kingdom, his castle, his wedding. "I came to the ceremony. I smiled. I congratulated your bride. I said goodbye." The simple, devastating words reconfigured his entire memory of that day. The blue dress, the serene smile. It hadn't been a show of support. It had been her closing act. A graceful, dignified exit. "Goodbye?" he repeated, his voice hollow. "Mira, I told you, that was nothing. A political necessity. It didn't change what you are to me." A small, sad smile touched her lips. It was the smile of a patient teacher explaining a simple concept to a child who cannot, or will not, understand. "That's where you're wrong, Lucian. It changed everything. The betrayal wasn't that you married her. I do, on some level, understand the duties of a king. The betrayal was that you thought I would stay." She took a step back, and the movement was not defensive, but definitive. "The betrayal was you looking at me, at everything we were, and thinking it could be a secret. Something to be kept in the shadows of your life while you lived another one in the sun. You thought I would accept being half of your world. You thought my love for you would make me small enough to fit into the space you left for me." He finding understood. The arrogance of it, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance. He had been so certain of her love that he had treated it as an immutable fact of nature, a resource he could draw upon no matter how he behaved. He hadn't asked her to share a burden. He had asked her to diminish herself. He had offered her the title of royal secret, of beloved mistress, and called it love. "I didn't," he started, but the words died. It was exactly what he had done. He had seen their love as separate from his life, when for her, it was her life. "I loved you," she said, her voice soft but clear as a bell. "I loved you enough to want all of you, not just the parts you were willing to spare. And I loved myself enough to not accept anything less." She glanced out at the sea, at the waves breaking on the shore. "So I left. I didn't run in anger. I walked away in sadness. There is a difference. I mourned what we had, Lucian, and then I built a new life, a whole one." He looked past her into the small, warm cottage. He saw shelves of books, bundles of drying herbs, a half-finished weaving on a loom. It was a small life, a simple life, but it was complete. It was hers. He was an intruder here, a ghost from a past she had already laid to rest. "I can fix it," he said, the words desperate, foolish. "I can end the marriage. The threat is contained. The alliance is stable. I can—" "It's not about the marriage anymore," she interrupted gently. "Don't you see? It's about the choice you already made. You stood in that hall and you chose. I just chose too." She didn't hate him. He almost wished she did. Hate was an emotion born of connection, of passion. Her calm, her peace, her gentle finality. That was a chasm he didn't know how to cross. He had come here expecting to retrieve something he had lost. He realized now he was here to beg for something he had thrown away. And it wasn't here anymore. She had already moved on. He stood on her doorstep for a long time after she had quietly closed the door, leaving him alone with the sound of the sea and the ruins of his own certainty. The journey back to his kingdom was a blur of self-recrimination. Mira's words echoed in his mind, stripping away his justifications and leaving only the ugly, selfish truth. "You thought my love for you would make me small enough." He had tried to put her in a gilded cage, and she had simply opened the door and flown away. He had not lost her. He had set her free with his own foolishness. He arrived at the castle a different man. The frantic obsession had been replaced by a cold, clear purpose. The problem wasn't Mira's absence. The problem was his choice. The one he had made in the council chamber. The one he had solidified at the altar. It was a choice he had to unmake. He sought out Seraphine immediately. He found her in the royal aviary, a place she favored, her slender fingers stroking the feathers of a snow-white gerfalcon. The bird was fierce and wild, but it gentled under her touch. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice even, not turning to look at him. "You have been away." "I have," Lucian said, stopping a respectful distance from her. "I have been to the southern coast. I've found her." Seraphine finally turned. Her cool gray eyes held a flicker of something, not surprise, but confirmation. "And is she well?" "She is," Lucian said. "She is living. She is whole." The word was painful to say. "She has moved on from a life that I asked her to fracture for my convenience." A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the soft calls of the birds. Seraphine looked from Lucian's tormented face to the calm, predatory stillness of the falcon on her glove. We have both been living fractured lives, haven't we? She said, her voice quiet. Lucian looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time not as a political pawn, but as a person. I owe you an apology, Seraphine. I used you. I used your name and your kingdom to solve my problems, and I have been an absent, hollow husband. It was a dishonorable thing to do. She gave a small, wry smile. It transformed her face, making her look younger, less like an ice queen and more like a woman. Your honor is your own affair, but your absence has been a gift. She hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. My father arranged this marriage. I did my duty, but my heart was not part of the treaty. She looked towards the aviary's entrance, where a man was standing, half hidden in the shadows. It was Captain Ivan, the commander of her personal guard, a man with a warrior's build and quiet, watchful eyes that never strayed far from the princess. Lucian had seen him 100 times, but never truly noticed him. Now, he saw everything. The way Ivan's posture relaxed slightly when Seraphine looked at him. The way her own regal stiffness softened in his presence. Ah, Lucian said softly. He felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of profound, shared understanding. He had been so consumed by his own tragedy that he had never considered hers. The alliance is secure, Seraphine continued, her gaze returning to Lucian. The Iron Clans have retreated to lick their wounds. My father has what he wanted, a permanent bond with your kingdom, a guarantee of mutual defense. The purpose of this marriage has been served. She stroked the falcon's head one last time before lifting her hand, allowing the bird to launch into the air and circle the high-domed ceiling. But a cage is still a cage, no matter how gilded. For all of us. I will grant an annulment, Lucian said immediately. On whatever grounds you wish. I will take the political blame. I will tell your father I was unable to— No, she interrupted, her voice firm. We will do this together. We will frame it as a mutual decision. A political alliance so strong it no longer requires the bond of marriage to sustain it. We will write a new treaty, one of sovereign nations, not of husband and wife. It will be more honest and stronger for it. He looked at her with newfound respect. You are a better politician than anyone in my council, Seraphine. I am a better politician than my father, she corrected him, a glint of steel in her eyes. He just doesn't know it yet. She glanced once more towards Captain Ivan, who gave her the slightest of nods. You go and fight for your whole life, Lucian. I intend to do the same. The process of the annulment was a masterpiece of political theater, orchestrated by Seraphine with Lucian's full support. They presented a united front to their councils, their families, and their kingdoms. Lord Valerius was apoplectic, seeing it as a sign of instability, but Lucian was immovable. For the first time in centuries, he was not just a king acting out of duty. He was a man acting out of conviction. He was choosing. When the last document was signed and the high priest had declared their union void, a profound sense of lightness filled him. He was no longer a king cleaved in two. He was just Lucian. And he had a life to win back. He did not ride to Saltwind in a royal procession. He went alone, on a single horse, with no crown and no guards. He did not go to Mira's cottage. Instead, he bought a small, derelict fisherman's hut at the opposite end of the village, a hovel with a leaking roof and a door that barely hung on its hinges. And he began to work. He learned to mend nets from an old fisherman with hands as gnarled as driftwood. He learned to read the tides in the sky. He learned to repair his own roof, his immortal strength making the heavy work easy, but his inexperience making it clumsy and slow. He was a king who could command the earth to tremble, yet he struggled to hammer a nail straight. The villagers were wary of him at first, this tall, pale stranger with haunted eyes and an accent from the heart of the kingdom. But he was quiet, he was respectful, and he worked hard. Slowly, a cautious acceptance took root. He saw Mira, of course. He saw her at the village market, buying bread and vegetables. He saw her walking along the cliffs, gathering herbs. He never approached her. He never spoke to her. He simply let her see him. He let her see him living a small, simple, whole life. He let her see him choosing to be there, in her world, on her terms. Weeks treated into a month, then 2. He would sometimes leave a basket on her doorstep in the pre-dawn light, a rare shell he'd found on the beach, a perfectly ripe wild peach from a grove he'd discovered, a bundle of firewood he'd chopped, dry and ready for her hearth. He never left a note. He never waited for a response. They were offerings, not demands. One evening, he was sitting on his own small porch, watching the tide roll in, when he saw her walking towards his hut. His breath hitched. She stopped at the edge of his property, where a crooked stone wall separated it from the coastal path. She was holding one of the shells he had left her, a spiral of pearlescent white. "The roof doesn't leak anymore," she observed, her gaze on his handiwork. "Most of it," he admitted, his voice rough from disuse. "The western corner still needs work." She was silent for a long time, turning the shell over and over in her hands. "Why are you here, Lucian?" she asked, her voice soft, but the question was direct, unyielding. "Because you are," he answered, his voice stripped of all artifice, all royal command. It was the simple, unvarnished truth. I was wrong. I broke the most important promise I ever made. Not by marrying Seraphine, but by thinking so little of you, of us, that I believed you would accept being a part of my life instead of its center. I can't undo that. I can't take back the choice I made. But I can make a new one, every day. And my choice is to be here. To learn how to mend things, even if the only thing I ever manage to mend is this roof." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he let her see everything. The regret, the shame, the boundless, aching love that had driven him across a continent and brought him to his knees in this tiny, wind-swept village. He had no power here. He had no title. He had nothing to offer her but himself. This broken, humbled version of the king she had once known. She didn't say anything more. She just placed the shell on top of the stone wall, a silent acknowledgement, and walked away. But it was a beginning. A few days later, she approached him at the market. "I'm making a poultice for Old Man Hemlock's chest," she said, her tone conversational. "I'm out of silver willow bark. I heard you found a grove of it up the coast." "I did," he said, his heart hammering. "I can show you." They walked together, in silence at first, along the cliffs. The quiet was different now. It wasn't the strained silence of their last weeks in the castle, nor the empty silence of his search. It was a careful, tentative space they were building between them, a place where new things might grow. He showed her the grove, and as she gathered the bark, he watched her, not with the desperate possessiveness of before, but with a quiet, reverent appreciation. They began to talk. Small things at first, the habits of seabirds, the best way to salt cod, the stories of the villagers. He told her about Seraphine, about Captain Yvonne, about the annulment. He didn't tell it as a grand gesture he'd done for her, but as a simple story of two people finding their own way to a whole life. He was not trying to impress her. He was simply sharing his life with her, the one he was building now. He learned about her life in Saltwind. He learned the names of the people she cared for, the rhythms of her days. He saw how deeply she was woven into the fabric of this community. She wasn't hiding here. She was living, thriving. And he knew that if he were ever to be part of her life again, he would have to be part of this life, not try to pull her back into his old one. One evening, after 3 months of these careful, quiet steps, he invited her to his hut for dinner. He had cooked for her a simple fish stew, the recipe wheedled out of the gruff fisherman who had become his reluctant friend. His hut was clean, sparse, but warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. They ate and they talked, and for the first time, it felt easy. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they were quiescent, relegated to the corners of the room. After they finished, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I am a king, Mira. I can't change that. My people need me. But the man who ruled that kingdom before, he was a fool. He thought his crown was more important than his heart. He was wrong. My heart is my kingdom. It has always been you." He didn't make any grand promises. He didn't speak of forever. He had learned the hard way that forever wasn't a word to be spoken lightly. It was a thing to be built, day by day. "I have to go back," he said. "But I don't want to go back to the life I had. I want to build a new one. With you. Not in the shadows, not as a part of my life. As its queen, its only queen, in the sight of the gods and everyone." He stood up and walked to a small, sea-worn chest in the corner. He opened it and took out a simple, folded piece of sapphire blue cloth. He unfolded it. It was her dress. He had retrieved it from her abandoned rooms, the only thing he had taken, a painful, beautiful reminder of his failure. He didn't kneel. He didn't present a ring. He just held the dress out to her, the fabric a pool of deep evening blue in his hands. I am asking you to come home, Mira, and to wear this again. Not as a farewell, but as a beginning. Marry me. Be my queen. And let me spend the rest of my forever proving that I will never, ever make you small again. Tears welled in her eyes, the first tears he had seen her shed through all of this. They traced silver paths down her cheeks. She reached out and touched the fabric of the dress, her fingers tracing the seams as if remembering a dream. Blue, she whispered, a watery smile breaking through the tears. A color for new beginnings. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and shining, and in them he saw not just forgiveness, but the hope he thought he had extinguished forever. Yes, she said. Yes, Lucian. I will. He brought her back to the capital, not as a secret lover restored, but as his intended bride. He rode beside her through the main gates, her hand in his, for all the world to see. There were murmurs, of course. The court was a viper's nest of gossip. But Lucian cared for none of it. He convened the full court in the grand throne room. The same lords and ladies who had witnessed his first wedding now stood assembled, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Lord Valerius stood near the throne, his expression grim, a French corrupt of ancient protocol. Lucian did not take his throne. He stood on the floor, in the center of the hall, holding Mira's hand. He was dressed simply, not in his royal finery. He was not a king making a proclamation. He was a man making a pledge. "Represent of the court," he began, his voice clear and resonant, filling the vast hall. "You have known me as your king for 5 centuries. You have known me to be a ruler who prioritizes the stability and security of this kingdom above all else. I have made treaties, waged wars, and even entered into a sacred union for the sake of that duty. But in my service to the crown, I neglected the service to my own soul, and in doing so, I committed a grave error." He turned to Mira, his gaze softening. "I betrayed the trust of the one person who makes this life, this kingdom, worth protecting. I asked her to accept a place in the shadows, believing that my duty as king was a separate and greater thing than my love as a man. I was wrong." He squeezed her hand. "There is no separation. My love for this woman is not a weakness. It is the source of my strength. It is the light that guides my conscience. She is not a consort. She is not a dalliance. She is the center of my world, and from this day forward, she will be the center of this kingdom." He turned back to the stunned, silent court. "I present to you Mira of Saltwind, my chosen bride, my intended queen, my only queen. Her word will be my word. Her command will be my command. Any who disrespect her, disrespect me. And any who disrespect me will find that my patience is not as eternal as my life." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He met Valerius's gaze, a silent challenge passing between them. The old vampire's face was a mask of stone. But after a long moment, he gave a slow, formal bow. It was an acceptance. The rest of the court, seeing their cue, followed suit, a rustling wave of silk and velvet as they bent their knees to their new, unexpected queen. The wedding took place a week later. It was not a grand political spectacle like the first. It was an intimate ceremony in the Moon Petal Garden, the place where he had first broken her heart. Now, it would be the place he made it whole again. Mira wore the sapphire blue gown. As she walked towards him down an aisle strewn with white rose petals, she was not the serene, heartbreakingly distant woman from his first wedding. She was radiant, her eyes fixed on his, her smile open and full of a joy that was reflected in his own soul. They spoke their own vows, simple and direct. He promised to honor her, to see her, to choose her, every day in the light. She promised to trust him, to love him, and to help him build a future worthy of their second chance. When he slipped a simple, unadorned silver band on her finger, it felt more real, more binding than the heavy sunstone gold had ever been. He was not just her husband. He was her convert, a believer in a faith he had once been too arrogant to understand. The simple, sacred truth that love is not a thing you possess, but a choice you make.